We're not prepared for this, 51 million ballots. It will be a tremendous embarrassment to our country. It'll go on forever, and you'll never know who won. People are going to get ballots that had no intention of voting, that maybe shouldn't be voting. I say this for the media. This will be the greatest catastrophe, one of the greatest catastrophes in the history of our country. That's how serious it is.
Okay, welcome back to Power and Politics. And as you heard there, U.S. President Donald Trump continues to cast doubt on universal mail-in voting. He says it will lead to a rigged election. Mail-in voting is being expanded in many states this year as a safe alternative to voting in person during the COVID-19 pandemic. And Trump's remarks today come on the heels of the Democratic National Convention, where many speakers, including former U.S. President Barack Obama, warned that Trump is trying to suppress the vote. For more on this, we're joined by the CBC's Katie Simpson and Kenneth Vogel. He is a Washington correspondent with the New York Times. They are both in Washington, D.C. Folks, it's great to see you.
Hello.
Good to be with you.
Katie, I want to start with you. Donald Trump seems to hate the post office, hate mail. Why is he saying that mail-in voting is going to lead to a rigged election?
Well, this is part of his overall strategy, or at least what we've heard from Donald Trump. And he's been quite explicit in what he thinks about the post office. Last week, he did an interview with Fox News Business where he said he didn't want to give funding to the post office because if you give funding to the post office, it's going to allow universal mail-in voting to take place. The thought behind the reason why Donald Trump doesn't like the idea of universal mail-in voting, it's political, that in elections traditionally in the U.S., not in all cases, but in many cases, that when there is the larger turnout, it tends to favor the Democrats. And so he sees allowing universal mail-in voting, making it easier for people to vote, particularly in the year of a pandemic, that is something that could hurt his chances if he it's going to hurt his chances heading into the fall election. So that seems to be the political argument. Donald Trump has not presented evidence, the substantive evidence to demonstrate that there is the widespread voter fraud that has been taking place, the widespread voter fraud in the United States. MIT did a study, I believe it was a couple of years ago, taking a look at 20 years of mail-in voting in the United States, and there was something like 143 convictions for mail-related voter fraud. So there isn't the substance to back up Trump's claims. His critics say it's all political.
Right. So, Ken, there has been a lot of pushback that there's really no evidence to support what Trump is claiming here. And he's also, as I understand it, he's using an absentee or a mail-in ballot himself, right, in a Florida primary? Or did that happen? I mean, why is an absentee ballot okay, but a mail-in ballot not?
No, none of it really makes a lot of sense. And it doesn't even make a lot of sense politically and strategically for him, because his own voters are going to need to be voting by mail, given the confines that have been put in place in a number of states, and also the steps that people are taking voluntarily in order to try to prevent becoming infected with the coronavirus themselves. They're going to be turning to mail-in ballots. And the Postal Service also says that Donald Trump's claims on this front don't make a whole lot of sense. And they were actually, as Louis DeJoy, the Postmaster General, was testifying before this congressional committee today, the Post Office, the Postal Service, was putting out a string of tweets boasting about their ability to handle any increased volume that might come from a surge in mail-in voting, as we expect to happen as a result of the pandemic. They were talking about even if every single American filed a mail-in ballot, sent a mail-in ballot, that would still amount to just a fraction of the amount of mail that they process in a single day. And of course, this is a process, mail-in voting, that transpires over the course of weeks and even months. There are people who are already voting early by mail for this election. So doesn't make a ton of sense, could end up shooting himself in the foot. And, you know, there are, in fact, concerns about the ability to administer a much bigger election, a much larger volume of mail-in ballots than we typically see. Most states, as Katie mentioned, do not vote entirely by mail, and so there will be some stress on the system, but probably not on the Postal Service side. It's more with the state election administration bodies that are really going to be tested here.
Okay, so Katie, the Democrats, they had their convention this week. They didn't mail it in. They kind of zoomed it in. It was an interesting week of speeches, you know, capped off with Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, you know, Barack Obama, with a very harsh rebuke of U.S. President Donald Trump. What's your assessment of how the Democrats did this week in sort of positioning the Biden-Harris ticket for the fall?
Well, Joe Biden did what he needed to do last night. Donald Trump and the Republicans have really tried to cast him as someone who is past his prime, suggesting that he's too old, he's not mentally all there and prepared to handle the job as president. And they put together some ads that show him stumbling. He does have a stutter. They've highlighted his stutter in some of their anti-Biden campaign ads. And they really set the bar high so that as long as he delivered a performance that was, on track by all metrics, that he was going to be fine. And Canadian viewers may be reminiscent of something like this happening back in 2015. One of my French colleagues who works in the bureau here in Washington, we were having a conversation about this. Corey Tenaik, who is a regular on the Power panel, he was a spokesperson for Prime Minister Stephen Harper back in 2015. And you'll remember before Justin Trudeau had his big first debate performance against Stephen Harper, the way that the Conservatives had sort of positioned it, that I believe Corey Tenaik said as long as he shows up with his pants on, it'll be, above the bar. And then so the expectations for Justin Trudeau as the Liberal leader at that time were so low that when he showed up and did okay, did fine, the performance exceeded expectations. That's sort of what the Republicans have found themselves. Donald Trump has caught himself in by casting Joe Biden as Sleepy Joe. That's what he calls him, saying that he's past his prime, not ready for this. It's that same sort of thing. So Joe Biden did deliver the message he needed to deliver last night so that the Republicans didn't have something they can really hold on to, have that shareable moment, put it out there on the social media to feed their base. He was able to deliver a coherent message. Whether it's going to rally the Democrats to unite behind him in the way that he needs, that again, we give it some time to see if that's going to be the case. But there is plenty of time before Election Day for Donald Trump to try and take aim at Joe Biden in a number of different ways.
Right. So, Ken, Joe Biden did show up in pants, so he certainly passed the basic price of admission here. How do you think of how they're framing the election, right? They talked a lot about character. They talked a lot about personality and judgment throughout the week. Is that the way to go if you're going to try to take out Trump?
That's certainly their conclusion and their assessment, is that there is so much antipathy for Trump in the electorate, across the electorate, particularly on the left and with Democrats, but also in the center, that it is enough to just be not Trump, an alternative to Trump. And you see this in the messaging, so much stress of how decent of a person Joe Biden is, and really focusing on his personality and his empathy and the way that he's dealt with grief over his life and consult other people who are dealing with grief, as a way to contrast with Donald Trump, who has not been so great at showing empathy. And so, that they are in some ways short on policy. They're not really contrasting themselves. I mean, there's sort of broad contrast with Trump on policy, but you don't see a lot of very specific plans on some of the key issues from the Biden campaign that the left really cares about. I'm thinking about like antitrust and, holding some of the big tech platforms accountable. You see some dissatisfaction on the left with his climate plan not being aggressive enough. But the Biden campaign is calculating that those liberals who might be pushing for him to be more aggressive on some of their pet issues are going to be more motivated by their antipathy for Trump and their desire to get him out, that they'll be willing to get behind Biden and sort of bite their tongue a little bit on some of the issues where they don't see Biden as quite as liberal as they'd like.
Okay, Ken, stick with you because just quickly, we're getting out of time here. The Republicans will get their rebuttal next week. What do you think we're going to hear from them?
It's interesting. I do think that while these elections, presidential elections where you have an incumbent president are usually a referendum on the incumbent, we're going to see Trump try to flip that on its head. And we saw a little preview of it today in the clip that you show, where he's going after Biden and talking about how Biden's going to take away your guns and put liberals on the Supreme Court. So less maybe about Trump's own record, because, of course, the country's in a pretty bad place right now. And you see a lot of dissatisfaction in polls with the direction that the country is headed, and more trying to show that Joe Biden is not an acceptable alternative. That may play well with the base. It's a little harder sell when you're going for that small slice of independent voters who typically decide elections.
Okay, Katie, just in the quick amount of time we have left, do the hardest thing in politics right now, predict what Donald Trump will do.
Oh, no. No. That's a hard pass. I'm going to pass on. That's a no for me, dog.
Okay, all right. We're going to leave it there. Thank you both to CBC's Katie Simpson and Ken Vogel of the New York Times in Washington. Thanks, gang.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.